I am pleased to announce the arrival of His Excellency Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, former Prime Minister of Malaysia, accompanied by Datuk Muhammad Ibrahim, Deputy Governor of Bank Negara Malaysia, and other dignitaries. Your Excellency Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to today's business networking reception organized and hosted by Bank Negara Malaysia in conjunction with the 4th Global Entrepreneurship Summit. To our guests from overseas, we wish you selamat datang and a warm welcome to Kuala Lumpur. Team Innovative Financing for Global Entrepreneurs. This reception provides a platform for Malaysian financial institutions to build linkages and network with entrepreneurs from around the world to explore business opportunities in Malaysia and the region. Malaysia is committed towards promoting the development of entrepreneurship. The SME sector is identified as a key economic driver in realizing Malaysia's vision to become a high valued added, high-income nation by 2020. Malaysia has a vibrant and dynamic financing ecosystem supported by business-friendly policies and infrastructure. Since 2009, Malaysia has been placed in the #1 position by the World Bank for ease of getting credit. Its dual Islamic and conventional financial system provides a multitude of avenues for entrepreneurs to access financing solutions. The deep and dynamic capital market, particularly in sukuk or Islamic bonds, also facilitates alternative funding propositions for entrepreneurs. Ladies and gentlemen, we are very honored to have with us today His Excellency Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, former Prime Minister of Malaysia, to share his thoughts and insights on entrepreneurship, how it contributes to nation building and Malaysia's funding opportunities for entrepreneurs and SME corporations. This will be followed by a 15 minutes of Q&A. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to invite His Excellency Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad to the stage for the special address.
The Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Malaysia, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, I would like to thank the organizers of this Global Entrepreneurship Summit for their invitation to speak on opportunities in Islamic and conventional finance as an innovative financing solution. I'm not sure I'm qualified to speak on this subject as a layman, but I'll try. Firstly, I observe there has never been a time when the Muslims are so rich, financially speaking, and in non-financial ways, also as they are today. But wealth is not wealth unless it can be used to improve the quality of life of the wealthy. True Muslims face certain constraints which may seem to prevent their wealth from giving them the maximum benefits. However, even with these constraints, the wealth of the Muslims is so great that there must be ways to put it to good use, at least for the benefit of those Muslims who suffer poverty and oppression. As Muslims, we know that it is enjoined upon us to contribute towards the welfare of deserving members of the community through sadaqah, zakat, and fitrah. If this is done properly, there should be no poor people among Muslims, as we have enough money to ensure a minimal standard of living for every one of them. If they are poor today, it is because we are not doing our duty as Muslims. Currently, much of the excess wealth of the Muslims and their countries are invested in bonds issued by non-Muslim countries. Buying bonds and giving loans are the same. The bond also yields interest, and as we all know, interest is haram to the Muslims. Worse still, we lose control over the money we lent. It may well be used against us. On the other hand, if we refuse to accept interest, then we will be enriching others, many of whom may actually be unfriendly towards us. But if we cannot buy bonds or lend money, what can we do with the huge wealth the Muslims have? We can, at worst, invest in Sharia-compliant businesses all over the world. And there are huge numbers of such businesses and industries up for sale now because of the downturn in many developed countries. Many of these companies are going bankrupt. Properties are also on sale worldwide, and this can also be bought. Properties increase in value over time. It is certainly more profitable to own properties than to keep money, as money depreciates over time. The depreciation coincides with the appreciation of the property over time. There are industries which need money to survive or to grow and expand. There is not a single developed Muslim country in this world. By acquiring industries, they will gain quick access to technologies. Unfortunately, many rich Muslims and Muslim countries merely buy industries without bothering to manage them and to acquire and improve on the technologies. This negates much of the benefits from the industries and leave Muslim countries as undeveloped as before, since wealth alone does not make a country develop. Research and development laboratories need money. There are tens of thousands of discoveries and inventions which need money in order to attain commercial viability when marketed. Financing or acquisition of research laboratories would enable Muslims and their countries to quickly get at the cutting edge of current technologies. Then there are known deposits of minerals, including oil and gas, all over the world. There are also known fields ready to be exploited. The Chinese are buying up all these fields, but there are enough which can be acquired by Muslim funds. Control of natural resources would give the Muslims a strong influence on the world's economy and finances. For all these, a body of several bodies can be set up, headed by trustworthy managers to ensure a good return on investments. Systems of monitoring to avoid abuses can be developed and used so that the funds are not wasted. An essential part of the exercise is to train Muslims in running these businesses. The tendency to have other people to manage and to pay them huge sums of money must be avoided. That way, Muslims will become dependent on others. Muslims have the capacity and can acquire the expertise to manage and to handle the investments as well as the businesses. Muslim engineers, accountants, technicians can be trained to take over the different elements of business, including expansion and marketing. These ideas are neither new nor quite innovative. But the fact is that we are not availing ourselves of all the opportunities presented to us now. Merely doing what others have been doing or are doing would be innovative for the Muslims. Some Muslim countries have been investing in some of these areas but have not bothered to master the business or acquire the technologies. Instead, they tend to hire others because they believe Muslims cannot manage, or sadly, Muslims cannot be trusted to manage the businesses. Looking for financial innovation is great, but Muslims are not doing even the conventional things which are known to solve many financial problems. Wealth is really not our problem. It is the management of wealth in conventional ways which is our problem. The introduction of Islamic banking is an innovation, but we have not exhausted the opportunities presented by Islamic banking. And of course, we have not touched conventional banking except to lend them our money. Today, we are rich through our resources. It will take a long time before we exhaust natural, God-given resources. So we can just sit tight and collect royalty from the people who have extracted our resources, especially oil and gas. Just by doing this, we can continue to be very rich. But for some countries, the natural resources of oil and gas will be exhausted soon. And some Muslim countries have no resources at all. Identifying and exploiting other ways of acquiring wealth is always wise. We may have noticed that some developed non-Muslim countries are without any resources. We need to learn about them or how they manage to overcome their lack of resources and still become developed. Malaysia used to be the biggest producer of tin in the world, but our reserves have been exhausted. So we needed to look for other means of enriching ourselves. We opened up our country to foreign investors. This helped, but this is not totally reliable. So we decided to start our own manufacturing industry with the little capital that we have. This enabled us to acquire the technologies and to manage the businesses ourselves. Despite being a developing country, we went into the automotive industry. We decided to produce our own cars. We could not hope to compete with the market with the great giants. What we were after was to master the art and science of engineering and modern manufacturing. We may not be very successful, but we have mastered much of the engineering skills and capacity useful not just for making cars, but other engineering products as well. The deployment of a little capital that we have into automotive engineering was in a way innovative and strategic. I will stop. Yes, excuse me. I will stop there because I find that I am talking to the wrong audience. I understood that this was supposed to be a gathering of Muslim businessmen, which is why I stress so much about Muslim problems and their wealth, etc. So I hope you will excuse me, but in compensation for that, I'm willing to take questions.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for the special address. Could Your Excellency remain on stage for the Q&A, please? Ladies and gentlemen, we will now open the session to the floor for Q&A. Please raise your hand for the mic and state your name and organization before posing your questions. Could I invite the first question, please?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, thank you very much for your interesting speech about our Muslim world. Really, it's my great pleasure to know about you from my childhood. Now I get the chance to ask you a small question. MashaAllah. I saw from my childhood you have a good interest about our Muslim world. But I want to know, we are suffering. You also know some of our countries in Syria, Palestine, Egypt, we are suffering. And the Muslim world business also not exploding, according to your view. So what can we do? How can we be united? How can we solve these problems? So because we know we are suffering, so we are not united. But I want to know then what can we do? So how can Malaysia help us to solve this problem?
Well, thank you very much. I've been asked these questions many times, but my answer is to blame the Americans and the Israelis. But basically, it is because Muslims do not practice the religion that they adhere to. They ignore their own religion in favor of other interpretations. For example, Muslims are supposed to be brothers to other Muslims, but instead we are killing them, and that is forbidden. So even if you can solve that little problem about being brothers and not killing each other, I think many Muslim countries will be developed today. Fortunately, in Malaysia, we have not come to that stage of killing each other, although we don't agree with each other. And because of that, there is some stability in this country. And because of that stability, we have been able to grow a little. Thank you.
The next question, please.
Thank you, Dr. Mahathir, for your talk. And my name is Kelvin, and I'm a Malaysian just starting out in life. Now, my question to you is, what would your advice be for young people today who are trying to succeed in life in an increasingly inflationary environment that we have now? And the second part of my question is, do you foresee a collapse of the global financial system, when the QE, the quantitative easing, starts to taper one day, which has to happen sooner or later? And my third part of the question would be, what do you think the government and the people of Malaysia should do to actually realize Vision 2020 as proposed by you 10 to 20 years back? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, young people. I was at one time young. You may not believe it, but I was. And when I was young, I was a rebel just like you. I didn't approve all these old people and what they were doing. So I started a kind of protest. In those days, we don't have demonstration. And we just put up posters at night so as not to be caught by the British police at that time. So it is the duty of the young to criticize the current system, because young people are idealistic. They have not yet met the problems which are usually unsolvable. So they think that, well, if the intention is good, of course it will happen. But as you grow older, you find not only the situation, not only does the situation refuse to be changed, but you yourself have changed to accept the situation. And if you grow older still, you become the defenders of the very system that you dislike. This, I'm telling about my own experience. Now I'm a member. Now I'm a member of the establishment, but unlike other members, I like to criticize this present government and other governments, because I think they are all wrong, because I'm always right. You know, with regard to the global financial system, I think it is wrong. I think we should revolutionize it. You know, in those days, money is used in order to invest in normal things, like opening a shop, selling coffee, or something like that. But today, you don't have to open any shop. You don't have to have any factory. You can sell money. And money is now a commodity. And you don't even need to have the money. By simply selling down currency, you can depreciate its value. And then when the value goes down, you can then buy at the lower price and deliver at the higher price, and you make tons of money. That's the current financial system. And because of that, such activities do not create any employment. You need no transportation. You need no insurance, because the transactions are all electronic. And as a result, lots of people are unemployed. I don't think that is a nice system. I criticized this system way back in 1996 or 97 in Hong Kong, when I was speaking to the IMF and the World Bank. And of course, they didn't take kindly to what I said. And they thought that my handling of the crisis was wrong. But now they are doing the very things they told me not to do many, many times over. If you don't have money, you make money. You print money. You know what is called Queen Elizabeth? Queen Elizabeth is quantitative easing, QE. How much money do you want? 400 million? 500 million? Just print them. And they don't even print. All they did was to send a check for that amount to Goldman Sachs or whoever. So that's the present system of financing. I think we should go back to simple things like not too many credit cards and things like that, but using real money which you put in your pocket to buy. But now, you know, in some countries, if you try to pay in cash, they reject because they want credit cards. See, so I think we need to look into the current financial system because it is open to all kinds of abuses. That's my opinion, but I'm no longer the Prime Minister, so it is safe. And what should Malaysians do in order to achieve Vision 2020? Well, they should equip themselves with knowledge. They should work very hard. They should be very honest. And they should not be corrupt. And they should do whatever is entrusted to them to do. And if you do that, Vision 2020 will be achieved. Young or old doesn't matter, but work and work hard. Thank you.
Can we have the next question, please?
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Mohammed Jinnah. You are my role model leader. You inspire a lot. I think millions of people like me also. And what we can do to clone Dr. Mahathir Mohamad in 57 countries. In 57 countries, we need a Dr. Mahathir Mohamad. What we need to do as a Ummah?
Well, at the moment, they're trying to clone frogs. They have made progress to sheep, and maybe one day they can clone humans like me. But if they are slow about it, I won't be around soon. Okay.
Doctor,
Next question, please.
Doctor, Archie Kural Group from Australia. A lot of entrepreneurs like me believe in live, love, learn, and legacy. And looking at you, you have created a beautiful legacy here in Malaysia. What happens in our instance is we live, we love, and we learn a lot, and then a big company buys us out. What we want to do is actually create a legacy. And what advice or what suggestions would you give that we create a legacy when we leave this world?
Grow big faster and absorb all those small ones. You see, today companies grow not because they are doing bigger and bigger of the same business. They acquire. They have these mergers and acquisition. I used to wonder, where did they get the money to buy all these things? Huge sums of money running into billions. Now I understand. The banks make the money for them. Not real money, but they can, write a check. Who knows whether that check is backed by any money or not? Some bankers are here, they're looking at me. I had always wanted to be a banker because, you become a banker, you can make your own money. Yes. What better business than that? I was talking to the central bank just now, the deputy governor of central bank. I was around when they gave a check for 5 million ringgit for starting the central bank. And now he tells me they have 400 billion ringgit. So it's good business. Start your own central bank. And it's not so strange, in Malaysia, of course, when we talk about central bank, it must belong to the government. But in America, the Federal Reserve is not a government bank. It is a private bank. And yet they can make money for the QE.
Next question, please.
Your Excellency, my name is Tony Ndomo. I'm from Kenya. I'm in the blue suit over here. Put my hand up. I should be pretty tall.
Oh, okay.
There you go, yeah. I'm from Kenya. It's a great pleasure to be here in Malaysia. My country is around the same age as your country. And there's a lot of things we have not done that you have done that everybody here rightfully gives you great praise for. The question then becomes, as a young entrepreneur, what advice do you give to young entrepreneurs in Malaysia, specifically because we have moved into a global existence where it doesn't matter where you're from. If you build a company like Facebook, you have as many people as 5 or 6 continents have in your application. And when you are working to build a company, you're not working to build a Malaysian company or a Kenyan company or a Jordanian company. You're working to build a global company. And a lot of the times, young professionals who are coming out of one country tend to compete with young professionals coming out of another country. And it becomes difficult to be a global citizen if you have a country mentality. So what advice do you give to young entrepreneurs in that scenario? Thank you very much.
Well, I believe that for a young entrepreneur, somebody who wants to start his own business, the best thing to do is really to work for others first. Work for others in order to acquire some capital, but more importantly, to gain experience. You cannot just rush into this area of business without knowing all the glitches, all the problems that are inherent in such new business. So work for a company for some time, and don't be in a rush. Learn about the business, and if you want to go into your own business, that business must be related to the business that you have learned. It is going to be a big struggle. Lots of people come to see me as if I can solve their problems. But the usual problem is that, the banks won't lend me money. I have such a good idea, but the banks, they are not cooperative at all. Well, I ask you, if you have some money, can you lend me money? I want to do some business. I mean, they weren't keen to lend their money, but they were quite keen to, borrow somebody else's money. So always remember that banks are like yourself. You don't give money to total strangers who comes with a big idea. You have to build up the confidence of the bank. And that can be through working for others and getting acquainted with the banks and giving a good record of your service. And banking is a question of trust. If they don't trust you, they won't lend you money. And if you are a total stranger, you are not going to get the money. So if you want to be an entrepreneur, begin small, begin as a wage earner, learn the ropes, acquire the expertise, and then only think of which part of that business you can go into. If you are careful about it, there is an even chance of succeeding. Thank you.
Sir, me Shahidul Islam.
Next question, please.
Me Shahidul Islam, young entrepreneur from Bangladesh. Sir, in your speech, you mentioned that Muslims have wealth, not the problem, but how to manage them is a problem. So from this point of view, my question to you that, as far as you know, many banks in Malaysia are doing business on Islamic financing principles. So on the basis of these principles, do the banks of Malaysia, which operate on Islamic banking principles, have any plans to promote global Islamic financing banking system so that different countries of the world, especially the Muslim world, can benefit from each other, just exchanging their ideas and making their transactions? As far as we know, that the bank starts their transaction from just recharging money to the mobile, even to the investing in the share markets. That means their spheres of activities stem from very smallest transaction to the highest transaction. So from this point of view, does the Islamic banks of Malaysia have any plan to have a global conglomerate or partnership with the other banks of different countries of the Muslim world? And by the way, just introduce their own principles to explore those resources which are unutilized and which are grabbed by the different Muslim communities. So sir, does this bank have any specific plan? I would like to know from you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Well, I'll tell the story of Islamic banking in Malaysia. Very early on, we realized that Muslims are constrained by the injunction against earning interest in any way. So there have been Muslim people who actually put the monies with somebody and not take the interest. That is not the right way to manage money. So we thought that if we can have a banking system that does not make use of interest but find some other way of covering the cost of running the bank, then that will be acceptable to many Muslims. That is one reason. The other reason is that we notice Muslims are getting very, very rich. They have lots of money and really they do not make full use of the money. They buy bonds and, well, even though it's forbidden, a number of them do, but some of them actually lend money without taking interest. Now, this is not good for multiplying the wealth of the Muslims. So we decided that we must find a way of mobilizing Muslim capital in a way that is compatible, that is acceptable to Islamic Sharia. And that's how the Malaysian Islamic Bank started. Because once we started, it all depends upon the management. They did succeed quite a bit, but now a lot of people have become interested. The conventional banks decided to open Islamic windows. They realized there's money to be earned from there. And now there are many Islamic banks all over the world, and we have become a sort of secretariat or center for Islamic banking. Bahrain is the other part of the management of Islamic banking. And the job is to spread the idea and the system to other parts of the world. And this is actually happening. But one thing I want to tell you is about a very enterprising Muslim man, I think he's from Pakistan or somewhere, who lived in the United States. And he decided that he cannot lend money, he cannot start a conventional bank. So he started an Islamic bank, and he calls this Islamic bank La Riba. And of course, everybody in America thought this is some strange Arab name. But La Riba simply means no riba, no interest. So he's doing fairly well. So there are ways of doing this, and I think the Islamic banks in Malaysia are quite willing to discuss with anybody who may want to learn about Islamic banking, and we do have already, I think, associations of Islamic banks where they exist. Thank you.
Dr. Mahathir.
Next question, please.
Your
Our beloved
Excellency.
Tun Mahathir, you are the patron of our Harvard Business School Alumni Club, which I'm a member. I consider you as one of the greatest entrepreneurs because you start up Petronas and build up into a leading oil giant. Can you please tell us what are your strategies in building Petronas into a global oil company, sir?
Yeah, the main thing why we have made Petronas global is because our reserves of oil is so small. We produce only 650,000 barrels a day compared with Saudi Arabia, which produces 10 million barrels a day. And they told us that it will only last 20 years. So if we have a national petroleum company which is going to exploit that small amount of oil and also last for 20 years, seems to be quite a waste. So we decided that we should go abroad and exploit resources abroad, and we should learn the whole thing about the petroleum business. We do not want just to collect royalty. We wanted to do things ourselves. And we have, well, mastered quite a bit of the petroleum business and industry, so much so that we are now working in about 30 different countries, doing things ranging from exploration to production, to marketing, to shipping, to building pipelines and building gas liquefaction plants, etc. So we are doing practically all the things that the so-called multinationals are doing. And what I wonder is why other countries which produce oil do not go into this business, because I think there is lots of money to be made. I'm not confessing anything, telling you anything about what Petronas is making, but it's quite a lot of money.
Okay, sir, your question,
Your
please.
Excellency, to Dr. Mahathir, may I ask you a current question? Last night, I met a China diplomat. He told me he's very worried because They had invested so much money in US treasury bonds. So what do you think the implications of the US government shutdown on their creditors?
Well, when you invest in anything, don't think you will always make a profit. You are going to make some losses as well. And when you buy bonds, it depends upon the strength of the currency that you are buying. And of course, currency fluctuates. At one time, the US currency was supposed to be so stable that we measure the value of our currencies with the US currency. It was at one time 2.5 Malaysian ringgit to $1 US. Now, of course, it is 3.24 or something like that. So it's either our currency has depreciated or the US currency has appreciated. That is why I suggested that we should have a trading currency based on gold. Because gold does fluctuate in price, but not so much. Because everybody values gold. It has an intrinsic value. But the US currency has no intrinsic value. Now, if we do what they do in the US, we would be bankrupt now. I mean, we are not allowed to print our own money without some backing. Our currency has to be valued against other currencies. But the US issued this Queen Elizabeth thing to the tune of $300 billion, and yet the currency doesn't depreciate. Usually, if you start printing money, currency value will go down. But for so long as people trade in using US currency, there will be a demand for US currency, and therefore there will be a value. But when you use gold, then you don't lose much, because gold will always have some value in any country. That is why we propose that we should have a trading currency based on gold. But of course, that is the words of a retired Prime Minister. Nobody is going to listen. But I think the US currency will not be stable for very long, because it's backed by nothing. And now it's backed by an economy that has almost stopped functioning. So you know what it is worth.
Ladies and gentlemen, His Excellency Tun will take the last two questions.
Assalamualaikum, Yang Amat Berhormat. Over here, at the middle.
Oh,
Okay, we have a lady.
Oh, lady.
Yes, thank you very much. I was very happy to hear that, to know that you always come accompanied with your wife, the Honorable Tun Siti Hasmah. Assalamualaikum.
She doesn't trust me.
Yang Amat Berhormat, my question is about your view about the advancement of women. Because if you go across the room, you can see about 40 to 50% is women power. And therefore, the government today is also saying about raising the bar for women in terms of decision-making and major positions. And we've got a few NGOs also saying, crying out loud, we should be in strong decision-making roles. So my question is your view about the advancement of women in Malaysia to bring us up the notch as in a leadership role for the Muslim Ummah. And my second question, what is your view about setting up a women's bank? Because you did say setting up a bank is the right way forward. Thank you very much.
Yes. And
this is another question that I get asked very often, especially in Muslim countries. They all want to know how women are treated in Malaysia. And I told them that we have women fighter pilots. That makes them, well, startle them quite a bit. But in Malaysia, I think women are very free. They have now ousted many of the secretaries to the ministries. That's how far they have advanced. And if you go to the university, between 60 to 70% of the students in the universities are girls. During my days, there was only one girl. The only thing that I worry about is that women are getting better educated. The men are not educated at all. They are almost illiterate. And at some stage, women must marry men. Of course, nowadays some women marry women, but not in this country. You must marry men, and the men that you want to marry cannot be of the same level of education as yourself. So you will be forced to marry a laborer or something like that, whereas you are a doctor. You graduated from the university, but there's no enough men around. So that creates a social problem. And we need to find a way of tackling this problem, probably by, well, whipping the boys into going to school and universities to study. You see, because now we are having disparity in the other way. Before it was more men educated with fewer women, and you are forced to marry the fewer women because then there's not much choice. Now it is the other way around. The women are forced to marry the uneducated men because there is not much choice either. So we need to have a balance. I like women, of course, everybody does. But I would like to see, always I would like to see an even distribution of everything, wealth or power, or between men and women, there should be 50 of the one and 50 of the other as well. So there should be this balance, and that will create a better society.
And the final question,
and with regard
please.
to Women's Bank, already the bank in Malaysia is run by a woman. For the last 12 years, one of the longest governors of Central Bank.
Hi, sir. My name is Waqas Ali. I'm here.
Oh, okay.
From Pakistan, and I'm running my company now. It's in over 1 year old company and successfully running. You talked about Muslims, businessmen, and other Muslim people who have money to invest on technology because this is where the world is going, and they should not just be too conventional. But as you can see, and as we all know, that technology is now mostly led by young people. I'm not just talking about young people at 20s, but I'm also talking about young people at 35 and between the age of 35 to 45. But the trust of these people who controls money or who make policies to use money, these policies are not mostly like in the favor of young people. So but the result is that the talented young people get acquired by the good company which facilitate them and which will help them work on their ideas. So their talented is used somewhere else. Like for instance, I know like many Pakistani top engineers, they go and they work at companies like Google, and I fear that same will happen in Malaysia. I have met with people, very quality education, and then people are very innovative here. So, but I fear that if the government and other business people, if they are thinking oil and gas, that's not going to help. Technology is where you should use your capital, and that's maybe we can fix that. So maybe you should talk about how young people should be, the money should be invested for young people, especially in technology. Thank you.
Well, young people would like to invest, become entrepreneurs, etc. But you have to build up a reputation for yourself. It takes time to build up a reputation. By the time you build up your reputation, you are no longer a young man. That's all right, because you have to begin sometime, and you have to begin early. And as a young man, you should have some ambition. You should take trouble to study, to gain experience, so that when you reach a certain age, you are already known, possibly to the banks, and you can get some help from the banks or from the government, because people know you, and you don't trust people you don't know. Even when you want to do business, you don't do business with people who are total strangers. You must know them. So try to establish yourself when you are young, and don't be disappointed if you don't get much help or people laugh at you with your ideas and all that. But always be a little bit patient. But I believe that the young people have the right mindset. They are critical. Later on, they'll find that it's not so easy to resolve the problem, which they thought could be done easily. But today, governments are very concerned about young people, especially as in democratic countries where the young have the right to vote. So we need to look after the interests of the young and give them the right kind of training. But the training today is more about acquiring knowledge of the sciences, knowledge of in other fields and all that. But what is lacking is a training in character, implanting the right quality, the right character in the young people, so that they will not just blow up because they feel everything is bad, and they do things which are not good for themselves, really. They have to remember that other people also have their opinions, and as much as you want people to respect the young must respect the old as well. This is not a very popular view, but now that I am old, I have that view. But I think that patience is greatly needed among the young people. And eventually, you'll grow old and get something. Not very satisfactory answer.
On behalf of Bank Negara Malaysia, I would like to thank Your Excellency Tun Dr. Mahathir for your insightful and inspiring address on innovative financing for global entrepreneurs. Please join me again to thank His Excellency Tun Dr. Mahathir. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your active participation. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of the event. Please help yourselves to the refreshments and enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you and have a great evening.